Well, today we have a fascinating, I always say that, don't I? We have a fascinating passage, one we can talk about, especially if I love the word, parse it correctly. And so what we're going to look at today is we're going to continue in 2 Thessalonians, and we're going to have a very writers don't like the word very. It's just, it's not specific enough. And, we say it all the time when we talk, but it's still not specific enough. So we have a rather well-known passage that can be misunderstood or misused. So let's talk about that. And at the same time, this is a passage that has been used in various forms of church documents. Remember what I said yesterday. If they're not speaking what the magisterium says, then it's not church teaching. It might be, but Saint so-and-so says that's not magisterial teaching. That's the teaching of Saint so-and-so. And if it's not rooted in what the magisterium teaches, it's not part of divine revelation. That's important because Saint so-and-so can be wrong sometimes. So when we look at this, we can see some powerful things. One of the things we want to look at right now is this passage here. So let me read it to you. We're in Thessalonians. We're in 2 Thessalonians. We're going to be in chapter 3. And what we're going to look at is this powerful reading about working. And here we are. We're going to be 6 through 10, 16 through 18. So let's go. And remember, we read from the Catholic Public Domain version. But we strongly caution you, brothers, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to draw yourselves away from every brother who is walking in disorder and not according to the tradition that they received for us. For you yourselves know the manner in which you ought to imitate us, for we were not disorderly among you. And so we want to look at what specifically that means, and we're going to continue it and then go back to it. But for you yourselves know the manner in which you ought to imitate us, for we were not disorderly among you. Nor did we eat bread from anyone for free, but rather we worked night and day in hardship and weariness, so as not to be burdensome to you. It was not as if we had no authority, but this was that so we might present ourselves as an example to you in order to imitate us. Then, too, while we were with you, we insisted on this to you, that if anyone was not willing to work, neither should he eat. Okay, that's the first part, and then we're going to continue in the second part and discuss that. Okay, so now we're going to go 16 to 18. Then may the Lord of peace himself give you an everlasting peace in every place. May the Lord be with all of you. The greeting of Paul with my own hand, which is the seal in every epistle. So do I write. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you all. Amen. Okay, now obviously that means tomorrow we're going to be in a different letter, and so we'll talk about that at the end of the show. So notice one of the things that he says, and this is an important distinction, because you hear people say, well, those people out there, they're not working, they're just living off the government, the whole bit. Okay. And people then quote this passage. If anyone was not willing to work, neither should he eat. Okay, fine. What about the people who are willing to work and can't get a job? That's not included in that group. So here's a question. If you own a company, are you willing to hire someone who is willing to work but can't get a job for whatever reason? And a lot of it has to do with, there are those who are handicapped. We know that. Jesus healed many of the handicapped, but that means that they were handicapped for many years and they couldn't walk or they couldn't see or they couldn't hear. And they were begging because no one would hire them. No one would, because they couldn't walk, they couldn't see, whatever. Okay. Or they had a withered hand, whatever the case may be. But then you have some others who, from some social reason, cannot be hired. And that's something that needs to be looked at because they're willing to work, but they can't work. Either people won't give them a job or they're doing work, but they're not getting paid for it. And, they're taking care of, their children, they're taking care of their houses, whatever not their houses, because if they're not working, how would they have a house? But you know what I'm saying there. They are doing some work, but they're not doing, but they're not getting paid for it. And that's not included in there either. What it is basically, as it was explained to me, is what you really find is people are saying, because it's from the same area of the letter, people are saying, as you heard yesterday, well, Jesus is coming back soon, so why am I working? Jesus is coming back soon, so why am I working? Or, I just got to notice that Jesus is coming back right away, so today is the day to put everything on credit. Because if you come back tomorrow, nothing's going to be here. Well, then you find out he doesn't come back tomorrow and say, well, what did I just do? That kind of thing. Obviously, that specific thing didn't happen. But you did have people who weren't working because they felt, why should we? We just should wait for the Lord to come back. And that is not Catholic teaching. But there are those who are having trouble working and they want to work, but it's not working. Those people who want to work, but it's not working, they can't be hired because of maybe they have a criminal offender record, maybe they have something in their record that people say stay away from them. Then where are they? They're begging on the street. They're living homeless. That's where they are. So the important question that you need to look at is if you have people who refuse to work, that's an issue. But if you have people who are unable to work, that's a situation to be solved. Now, there are all kinds of ways to do that. One of the fascinating things that this was a reality in the parish where from the town where I grew up, and that was Immaculate Conception Parish. I don't know if it's still going on, but they had a program for those people who had Down syndrome or any other similar cerebral condition. I don't know what you'd call it. I don't know what the official word is today. So, and what they would do is they would be the people who would put things in packages and seal the package. So you go buy, hypothetically, you go buy something at the store. Well, that is in a sealed package, and that package may have been sealed by this program, people in this program. So they had work to do, and they enjoyed it. They absolutely loved it. And one of the other aspects of that is it creates a social environment. But they worked and they got paid and everything else. There was a story recently about a man who had Down syndrome and worked for a supermarket. And ultimately, this new guy came in and who was like leader of the department or leader of the supermarket said, no, we don't need people like him anymore. And the whole town got upset because this guy was so important to the operation of the store for the townsfolk or city folk who went to shop at the store, and it caused a great problem. This is, but these are people who are willing to work. Some of the people who you will meet on the street, and they'll say, well, they're on the street. They're only there because they don't want to work. No, some of them are there because they can't find work or they're discouraged workers. Where do you think discouraged workers go? There are two kinds of people who don't work, people with trust funds and people who are homeless. Everyone else in between works, but those with trust funds and those who are homeless don't work. And the ones who are homeless struggle every day. And again, find out why or what needs to be done to get them a job. This is an issue I have with unions. The church supports unions. Now, I've had a couple arguments with a couple of unions. We won't mention what they are because they, like one of them actually played a game with me and they lost. Just so you know, they played a game with me. They tried to get me to speak on what the church talks about unions. I was all for that. And then they put my name on a union rally poster in their trying to unionize a local company. And I was called by the head of the company saying, how did your name end up on a union rally poster? I spoke to the guy who put my name on the union rally poster, and he said, well, you said you were going to give the talk, so too bad. And he gave me an attitude. And you don't do that to me. So I simply gave them what the church taught about unions, and then said to them, the question isn't whether or not you should join a union. The question whether is you should join this one. They chased me out to my car. I told them the story of a major failure that union had. So our church is for unions, and we support unions, but don't turn around and take that support and throw people under a bus with it. But one of the concerns I have with unions is and if someone is part of a union and wants to call, and we have our phone number, you can leave a message. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Or you can send me an email, producer@Catholic Audio Media. Do the unions, because I believe they should, reach out to the homeless to put them into a training program and get them hired. Now, some people who are homeless, they have some kind of a mental disability that makes it impossible for them to work. That happens too. That's a reality too. They cannot work, even though they appear able-bodied and everything else, but they have a mental disability, maybe some form of serious mental illness like schizophrenia or something like that, where they can't work. Okay, we understand that. But that's a question to be asked. Do unions reach out to the homeless to try to get them to work? And especially if a union is discovering that they have more work than people to do the work. These are important discussions. So this is all part of that issue. If people will not work, that's refusing to work. But what about the people who cannot work? How do we solve that problem as people of faith? Because obviously it's something that should be solved. And the church teaches that people have a right to work. Remember what I said to you before, how much, I bring it up so many times because you can tell how much I hate it. Justification for higher education, that big mansion on the side, it was a cartoon, and the 5-car garage and everything else. How many people are poor because all that money is going to that person who's got his justification for higher education house, and the company can't afford to hire the poor? Interesting question. We'll be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Have you ever wanted to read the Bible but didn't know which readings to check out? Well, how about looking at the church's daily readings? You can find them at the website of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Just go to bible.usccb.org and click on the date that pops up on that page. There are other options on that page as well. That is bible.usccb.org, and click on the date and you will see the daily readings for your own prayer and study of the Bible. This is a prayerful tip from St. Anthony Parish in Allston, Massachusetts. If you're looking for a way to contact the show, there are 2 ways to do it. You can do it by phone and contact our listener line. Telephone number is 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. You can also email the show at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. That's producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. Those are 2 ways to contact the show, and feel free to do that. So again, that's 617-297-7452. You can leave a message on our listener line or send us an email at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. So one of the things we want to look at in light of that is how we can help people to work. One of the fascinating things that I discovered when I was running a parish, and you discover that also when you see a company, is the responsibility the company owners or CEOs or whatever have to all the people who work for the company. That's important. You will have people who will come into your organization who will say, just fire them, just fire those people. Well, it doesn't really work that way. There are people who may be terminated, who maybe should be terminated or whatever, but you still have to realize that there are families involved, there are people involved, and so you have to weigh the difference of how the situation can be fixed, if it can, what can be done in such a way that this it makes everyone happy, so to speak. Everyone is able to. So if you're running a company and you decide, well, I'll give you a story that happened in real life. And you decide that such and such a person is a burden on the company, and so you feel he or she should be fired. Well, then the question is, if you fire that person, how is it going to affect their entire, the family, their, existence, the whole bit? And so if you feel you have to fire them, you need to find a way to do it that makes the firing less impactful. For example, in certain dioceses, there is a severance pay that is paid out that is 1 month of pay. No, was it 1 month? Or I think it's one. I think it is 1 month of pay for every year of work. So if someone's been working for the company for 15 years, then they are entitled by the policy of the diocese to get 15 months worth of pay to help them in their transition. So that helps that. But you want to avoid that situation because at all possible, because not only is it going to affect their family, it's going to affect the morale of the organization. And sometimes you just have to do it, but you don't want to unless the person is a total burden on the company, and you have those situations too. I had a situation where I had a man who I did not understand the situation. All I knew is I'd ask him to do something and he wouldn't do it, or he'd be told to do something and he wouldn't do it right, and I couldn't figure it out what it was, and it was very irritating. And I asked him to do something and didn't do it, and I'm finally at the position where he's got to go. And someone said, why don't you look up something called Asperger's? And I said, what's Asperger's? And it's a form of autism. Some people say it exists, some people didn't. But whatever the case may be, there was a certain behavior that is part of it. So here I am, ready to just say, I'm done. And so I did a little research on it. And I made it. And by the way, if you're dealing with an adult with Asperger's or any form of autism, very hard to get information. They have plenty on kids, but not on adults. And there are a lot of people who are diagnosed as adults. So in any case, I ended up doing some research, still wasn't sure. And then I called an occupational therapist. And the occupational therapist said, well, what are the behaviors that are bothering you? And I said, well, this is one I haven't personally seen, but my predecessor saw this and said it was really irritating. He says, okay, what is that? And I said, when we had our Catholic school open, it was closed soon after I came on board the parish, but a Catholic school open, he would wash the floor of one classroom and wait for it to dry before he would go to another classroom. And the occupational therapist says that is classic symptom of Asperger's. And then she said, what you need to do, what you'll find he may do is if you ask him to do 300 copies, he will stand in front of the copying machine and watch the 300 copies made. He won't do anything else because that's the way he's thinking. And I said, well, I haven't seen that, but that wouldn't surprise me. Well, then I understood that he had Asperger's. Once I understood that, and I understood how to work with a person who had Asperger's, he was the best worker I had. Absolutely the best worker I had. And later, someone was dealing with someone with Asperger's, and he was having a hard time with it. And I just said to him, it's like a different operating system. You just have to know that. They'll do everything they need to do. They'll be great workers, great people, the whole bit, but you have to realize you're dealing with a different operating system. That's the thing to keep in mind. Well, and again, you got to realize, you don't have to realize anything, I'm just explaining to you, that had I fired him, that would have had tremendous economic impact on him, and it could have affected the morale and everything else. And so you have to look at the bigger picture. And so when you look at the bigger picture, then you understand it. Well, that's part of the responsibility, because the other side of that is the issue with, as we were talking earlier, with homelessness. If you just turn around and say, fire them, get rid of them, well, what impact is that going to have? Hopefully they can find another job, maybe in another industry. Maybe it's not working in this industry. Maybe they belong in another industry. Hopefully they can find another job. But if they can find another job, that's great. But what happens in the meantime? And this is something that we have to look, because we can look at what Jesus says, when I was hungry, you gave me food. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But he doesn't say, because it wasn't an issue at that time, but it's an issue for our time. When I needed a job, you hired me. And right now, if someone, for example, has a CORI, a criminal offender record, they cannot be hired by the church, basically, or it's very limited. So people who look to the church to help them, and I'm not talking about people who are going to steal from the church or anything else, but they can't be hired by the church. And so one resort they would have is gone. And that's, people say, well, that's the way it should be. Fine. But what do you do with the homeless person who is living on the street, who may not survive the night if it's 2 degrees below zero, and they can't find a shelter, or they're unable to go to a shelter? What do you do? And what is the Lord calling us to do? I'm not saying what would Jesus do. I'm saying, what is the Lord calling you to do? And how do we solve that? And some of the people, maybe they can't get a job. Maybe they are unable to work. And maybe they have a habit of criminal behavior that makes it impossible to work. That happens too. But in either case, these are things that we have to look at in light of that. If someone refuses to work, that's one thing. But if someone can't work, how do we figure that out? We'll be back on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Did you know that Catholic TV offers free apps for both Android and iOS users? Visit the website catholictv.com or your app store to download this faith resource to your device. If you're looking for a way to contact the show, there are 2 ways to do it. You can do it by phone and contact our listener line. Telephone number is 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. You can also email the show at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. That's producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. Those are 2 ways to contact the show, and feel free to do that. So again, that's 617-297-7452. You can leave a message on our listener line, or send us an email at producer@catholicaudiomedia.com. We're back, and tomorrow we're going to be looking at the memorial of Saint Monica, most famous for being the mother of St. Augustine. So that's tomorrow. And then we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 1 through 9. And we're going to start in the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians. And how do we know it's St. Paul? Because 75, I don't know if it's actually 75%, but we'll call it 75% of the letters in the New Testament come from St. Paul. And all the rest have the name of the writer on them, except for, of course, Hebrews, which is not from St. Paul, and Revelation. In the meantime, we will be back tomorrow. Have yourself a blessed day. Subscribe and like.
Yeah. You know the real is back. Father Carr Chaplain from the city of champions, dropping daily reflections coming straight from the field. The raw truth revealed for the strong-willed. It's the Greatest Act of Defiance podcast with your host Father Carr, a message built to last. The Greatest Act of Defiance podcast. That's right, the Greatest Act of Defiance. Word up. Word up. Word up. Word up.
The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution. The logo used in promotion and also the rap that ends our program are AI. No other form of the program in any way, shape, or form is used with AI or using AI.